There are many arguments against strict behaviorism and evidence for some form of nativism, though the debate isn't entirely resolved. For starters, children learn language fairly easily and spontaneously. All children acquire language with relative ease. If language was learned like any other skill, we might expect a lot more variation in how it's acquired. Language acquisition is rapid and it's spontaneous. It just bubbles up. Apes and parrots, as we've seen, require numerous M&Ms, crackers, and treats. With children, there's no explicit teaching or not much explicit teaching or systematic reward system for learning the rules of language. Regarding the ease with which children acquire language, Steven Pinker writes, "In general, language acquisition is a stubbornly robust process. From what we can tell, there is virtually no way to prevent it from happening short of raising a child in a barrel." What's more, children pass through the same sequence of stages in language acquisition, such as cooing and babbling, and we'll look at these in more detail next week. All kids do this spontaneously, and it appears to be hardwired. We'd expect a lot more variability in how this process unfolds if language learning wasn't innate. Thirdly, and most interestingly, I think, is that children say things that aren't imitated and ignore parental input. "Mommy, I hate you" is not a sentence that most children hear, and yet they put it together all by themselves because they figured out the rules of sentence construction. Children stop imitating early on, around 3 years of age, and begin to generalize about language. This seeming setback or decline in language performance is due to regularization errors, where children begin to over-apply grammatical rules. Regularization errors are things like, "Daddy go," "He hitted me," "My foot's hurt," and "Someone bringed it inside." Children know that sounds can be verbed. Adults say things like, "I'll phone you," or "I'll text you." Children picking up on this ability will say things like, "broom it," or "scissor it," or, as my son has said, somewhat ominously, "knife it." Children will say things like "amped" as a contraction of am and not, which, logically speaking, makes perfect sense, but it turns out it's a regularization error, and children are learning the rules of language and not strictly imitating. A great test shows that even very young children know the rules of language, and they know them so well that they can apply them to even nonsense words. This shows that language is not purely imitated. The test is called the WUG test. Let's take it now. This is a WUG. There are two, WUGs. This is a bird who knows how to rick. It is ricking. What did it do yesterday? Yesterday it ricked. Right. This is a little WUG. What would you call such a little WUG? Depending on your language and its own rules, you might say WUGlet or WUGita or maybe even WUGgy. The WUG test, simple as it seems, tells us that children internalize the rules of language. They can form possessive like Sally's doll, diminutives like WUGita, the past tense and plurals. And as we've seen, this is not so simple. Think of the plural, again, for cats and dogs. It's not the same. One is a s sound and the other is a z sound. There are actually fairly complex rules for adding these two sounds to form a plural. Though apes can clearly communicate with humans, they don't have the same capacity to apply language rules. In order for behaviorism to work, kids have to get and respond to feedback from parents and caregivers. As it turns out, children don't pay much attention to linguistic input, at least not enough to account for language learning. Here's a case in point. The child says, "My teacher holded the baby rabbits and we patted them." The parent says, "Did you say your teacher held the baby rabbits?" Child, "Yes." Parent: What did you say she did? Child: She holded the baby rabbits and we patted them. Parent: Did you say she held them tightly? Child: No, she holded them loosely. You can see from these examples and this cartoon that children are focusing more on the content of what adults say than on positive and negative feedback about correct grammar. This is not to say that they never listen to what you say, even about grammatical feedback, but that they have their own internal ideas about how language should work. The final bit of evidence that children don't just imitate is that even when there is no language to imitate, children invent one. In Nicaragua, deaf children were brought together for the first time to learn things like fingerspelling and lip reading. This attempt failed, yet children ended up creating their own form of sign language. They invented a language. Each subsequent generation of students built upon the previous, and the language became increasingly complex. This language invention can't be explained with respect to behaviorism because, again, there was nothing to imitate. A final idea that you'll read about is the kind of poorly named theory or active construction of grammar theory. This suggests that children begin to form theories about how language works based on what they're exposed to. A general understanding of the nativist position is compatible with theory, that children may be hardwired to statistically decode language.